Hi folks, hope you're all well out there still. Today's video is going to be about LimeSurvey. Now LimeSurvey is a web-based survey or polling type service. It's very much like SurveyMonkey, but one of the big differences really is, although both are in the cloud and both do a very similar thing, LimeSurvey has a community edition, which you can see down here, which offers you the ability to self-host it, modify it, extend it, and do other things which you can't do with SurveyMonkey. So I know SurveyMonkey is very, very popular. It's the one that I know many corporates and so on send out. So we can just have a look here at SurveyMonkey up front. One of the things is around the costing. Okay, you are seeing it in rands at the moment here, but just by way of comparison, there is the free tier. And you'll see some of the limitations being especially there 10 questions per survey or poll that you're sending out and a measly 40 responses per survey. So, you know, that's really actually very, very limiting. Even if you're going to do it in an organization or amongst a group or whatever the case is, the chances are you might easily go over 40. So the paid tier here for SurveyMonkey, this runs at about $35 per month. You can see here, yes, the number unlimited, questions unlimited. It's 1,000 responses per month. So, you know, there's a couple of issues here that you'll start running into. So you've either got to decide, you know, you're paying corporate and you just pay for SurveyMonkey and you take it as it comes. Or many enterprises and organizations do also have web teams in-house. So if you do have something like that, then certainly a web team could quite easily handle something like LimeSurvey. It's really just a question of setting it up once and then really setting up each survey. What I will do in the video is I will take you through a survey, a very simple type survey that I've set up, and then I'll also end up running through the menu options and some of the other options that you've got to configure it and customize it. But I'm going to keep it very high level and simple because surveys can get very, very complex and you can go very in depth, but I think we're going to lose everybody, including myself, if I end up going down to, you know, that sort of level. So I'm really going to look at things like multiple choice answers, a text response maybe, and maybe single response choosing from a list of 5 or 6 or so, and you know, maybe there's also things like arrays, but that's generally about as far as most people go. The difference, though, of course, with LimeSurvey is that you can go a lot further with regards to the community edition. You don't have all the restrictions and the limitations. So as they say there, the community edition is 100% free. There is an online forum as well that you can contact for help. There's also a pretty good manual, and as I said, there is the forum as well. Just remember, you're not necessarily going to get support from LimeSurvey because you don't have a paid support account. But in itself, LimeSurvey is very, very popular. It's the sort of the go-to alternative as far as surveys goes. So your options really to self-install it are going to be something like a small VPS maybe in the cloud with a cPanel hosting or a Webuzo, or you could just install it yourself. And you know, that runs into, I think, $3 or $4 a month for something like that. Or you could even host it on a hosting at home and share it like I've shown in a previous video, which I did. I'll put a link in the top right corner as well. How you can just set up your own hosting for free, whether it's a Raspberry Pi or something else, and share that out with a domain name. Most people aren't going to know the difference. Once you've actually installed it, this is the screen that you're going to be greeted with. What I've already done in this case is I have just given the site a name, and I have set up one custom logo for the responses and the results and the questions that you answer. You'll see that as well when you fill it in. What I'll also do at the end is I will share the link for the survey so you can go and fill in the same survey that I'm showing you as well, and you can have a look at the simplified results, should I say, because the more detailed results you'll actually be seeing as the admin operator. Essentially, your choices here are going to be create a new survey, list available surveys, various global settings that can be adjusted and set. The comfort update is if you've set it for this update service, and I seem to think this might require a paid key. I'm not 100% sure. There is a LimeStore as well with a couple of plugins, and then there's also a couple of themes. I can maybe just quickly show the plugin side. The plugins, there are categories and there are also compatibility versions. Now the thing is, I'm running the very latest version, so what I did discover is that there aren't very many plugins that are compatible with it, unfortunately. But just to give you an idea of some of the plugins, okay, we're missing a graphic here. Don't know what happened to that graphic. I must have had something blocked here again. But for example, there's a range slider. Now that'll mean instead of selecting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can slide the slider up and down. A net promoter score, I'm not too sure about. There's another range slider for version 3. There's a default template. There, for example, is a word cloud. And this will be for text type questions that are being answered. You can throw up a word cloud as one of the results, or the the views to see what people have been choosing. A root page redirect plugin, and so it goes on. Basically, you'll just download these as a zip file and upload and import them into the LimeSurvey application, and the plugin will become available. So I think, let me just go and have a look at one of the available surveys first of all. So this just shows I've got one survey already created, and I've given it a title there, Survey for Gadgeteer ZA Video Watchers. Its status is it's on the go at the moment. You can also pause and end. You can have surveys, for a particular time as well. I think when we run through the options, it'll become a lot clearer maybe. You can look at stats for that particular survey, and then you can go to the general settings and texts. I've got 3 sample responses that I've filled in already. You can also create survey groups. And remember also, surveys are not necessarily just open and public. You can also have, for example, 40 specific people or 100 specific people that you've invited to participate in a survey. And you can also group people as well into different groups. And it'll allow different views, of the actual responses. But let's just go and have a look at some of the settings for this survey. You'll see at the top here, there is things like run, stop, delete the survey, and so on, and then export the survey. This one should be running at the moment. Actually, I don't know why it says run survey. The stop indicates that it is running. There it is. You can set languages or additional languages. Now, what's interesting with the languages is you can actually set up all the questions and everything in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different languages. I've done it once in the past, actually. I just used Google Translate to get the equivalents for everything that I was looking for, and then people can literally fill it in whichever language they choose. Obviously, I don't have group set at the moment, so it is a default. You can also show what format people will see the questions. Do they get it one question at a time, group by group? I think mine is actually set up group by group. It's inheriting that. Or do you get everything all in just one long page and you start filling it in? So you can choose all that sort of thing, who the owner is. It's inheriting various rights and so on here. And I've also got a theme chosen. So I've taken the slightly darker theme as well. This is the one you'll see when you're filling this survey in. So that's the overview. This is actually the URL that will be shared for the survey. So this is the one that I will put in the link below the video. You can also choose an end URL, but I decided to actually show you the stats instead. And I discovered, I think if I put an end URL, so for example, take that to a web page or whatever the case is, it didn't seem to be showing up the results. I'm not sure what happened there, but you've got an option to throw people, through to a sort of a particular web page as well. And then you can give descriptions, welcome message, an end message, and so on. These are the times. You can give it an expiry date. As I said, it can be public or not public, by invite only. And then there's various other just general settings as well, like the theme and so on. It is actually already you can see the indications here under the summary overview is that responses to the survey are anonymized. I have set it for that. It's presented group by group. Responses will be date stamped. In other words, it'll just give an indication of when people have responded. The referrer URL will be saved. So if you're coming from YouTube, it's just going to say that 7 people came through from YouTube, 2 people came through from Odyssey Video, or wherever you're seeing this thing, maybe from Twitter or whatever the case is. So that's just of interest to me as well. It uses cookies for access control. That is just also eliminating things like double, triple, quadruple logins or something, and people filling in the survey 5 or 6 times. Obviously, if you delete your cookies, you can fill it in a second time, but it just assists with that sort of thing. It also has a basic email notification that can be sent back and so on. Oh, the other thing I should also just mention is, one of the reasons it's not just about cost actually for using something like LimeSurvey. It's also the fact that if you're self-hosting it, no one else is actually looking at the results or sharing the data. It's only you, me, yourself, whoever is hosting it, that is actually seeing the data. If you're hosting it a third party or in a cloud service, you don't actually know what is being shared with third parties and their partners for better tailoring your online experience, as they put it, So that is another one of the reasons why some may specifically want to use something like LimeSurvey. If you want to guarantee the privacy, for example, of your respondents, then self-hosting is the way to go. It's not really putting it in the cloud. Okay, this is just general settings. Again, it's language, administrator mail address for responses, bounce mail, groups, themes, and so on. This is the various text elements. So this is where I set up, for example, the title for the survey, and then the description, the welcome, the date format. You can obviously set that, whichever way. I'm just using the official South African format there for dates. The data policy. So this is now specifically where you'd fill in data privacy policy and that sort of thing, especially if you're capturing personal details, things like names or phone numbers or IP addresses and various things. This is the sort of thing you might have to fill in depending on where you are and who your audience is actually. I'm inheriting the themes at the moment, though, from the global settings. This is just the presentation and navigation that the person will experience when they're filling in the questions. So you can put things like delays. You can say whether question numbers and codes are shown. You can show whether no answer is an option or not. You can show whether it's X number of questions out of so many in the survey, backward navigation. A lot of this is the finer details that you can adjust. I have put things on like public statistics, because in this case it doesn't matter. It's nothing personal really being filled in. And show graphs in public stats, and yes, automatically load in URL when survey completes. So these are which reminds me actually what I must actually do is load that stats link in as the end link. Then when you're finished, you should actually be taken straight away through to the stats for the survey. So this is now regarding the participants settings, and I have activated here, as you'll see, for anonymized responses. Remember, in some cases you might need to validate the person that is responding. So it's not always that it's going to be anonymized. There can be very good reasons. Maybe it's within an organization or something else, and it's information of that sort of nature where you might have to identify or be able to communicate back to people. So, there are reasons for that you might need it on or off. Multiple responses, public, that could be for competitions, for example. Allow public registration. I've said no. You've got to be careful, obviously, with public registration again, because some of these things will require GDPR and other requirements if you're going to be taking, recording people's personal information. HTML format for mail, send confirmation mails is on. Then this is the notification and data management settings. I'm not going to go through everything in too much detail. You'll see I'm not using Google Analytics because that obviously then sends a lot of stats and data across to Google, but it is an option. You could use Matomo and Analytics if you wanted to instead. I've done a video about their stats as well. This is just the visibility again, if it's got an expiry date. You can link it to the public index page. That was that landing page we came in when it showed available surveys. So you could have a couple of surveys available to people to answer. For example, something about health and something about computer usage and whatever the case is. You could have a whole bunch of different surveys, and you're just indicating now whether this one is or isn't listed there. Cookie preferences, capture, I've got those off, but that again cuts down obviously on some spam responses. Survey permissions. Now this would be if you've limited it, like I said, to specific groups of users or specific users. You'd actually enter them here and it would have to validate against them, whether by email or whatever. So this is all the general survey settings. What we now go on to is things like the questions and responses and the more specifics of the actual survey. So there's a couple of questions that I've already done. And you will notice also I have just included as an example a conditional response, a logic response. In other words, if somebody, I think one of my questions here was, where did you find out about my videos? And I've got a couple of general options where I am posting them. But I've got the option also something else. So what happens for this question 8 in group 2 is if the person had answered something else in the previous question, only then do they see this question 8 popping up to give a textual explanation as to where they found the video. If they say, if they've picked one of the other options, they won't see this question and they'll go straight on to the last question. So this is just a summary of the questions. This is the groups of questions. So I've got two specific groups of questions, one being just general biographical type questions. In other words, where you from and one or two other questions. And then the second group is about the videos themselves. I can't actually reorder at the moment or change that because it's actually a running survey. You've got to stop the survey to make changes if you want to, and there's only specific types of changes you can make. Okay, I haven't initialized the survey participants, so that's not an option. I'd have to switch to closed access mode then. The email templates. This will be for things like invitations or a reminder to complete it if they haven't done so, a confirmation, a registration. This will be really for named participants. I don't have any quotas set for the survey at the moment. I also don't have assessment mode activated, and I'm not actually sure what assessment mode. I should just say that I've used LimeSurvey quite a couple of years ago for my work, and it has actually expanded quite a lot since then, and there's a couple of things that I'm not 100% familiar with, to be honest, which will be much like panel integration, for example. Edit survey panel integration, I'm not too sure. This is the survey responses themselves for people that have actually responded. So obviously you could drill in and have a look at a specific response and just see. So this would be safe because this is anonymized, remember, through the seed here. But if, for example, there was one very puzzling response, there was a particular answer that you were wondering about, you could just drill in and have a look at the other questions in context or answers in context maybe. So sometimes there is a need for this, but you can see, look, it is anonymized. That's really very much the issues. You can view as a XML. You could actually edit the response. Remember, you are the administrator. The only thing with this is, of course, I mean, what does this mean? You're going to fake the responses. Well, I suppose so. Or you could delete a response if you didn't like it. Well, at the end of the day, I suppose that is going to be your integrity as well. You know, as I said, you are the administrator, you are hosting it. So I suppose that's something you can do. Then the statistics. So the first part is the filter on the statistics. So what you could here do is you could filter, say using that group, for example. If you had, I don't have questions like male and female, but I do have questions like continents, Africa, or whatever the case is. So you could just filter specifically, say, on the African continent responses and compare it, say, to the Europe continent responses. That's one option here. Or you could compare males with females, or whatever else you wanted to filter on, age groups, or whatever the case is. So that's the point of the filtering up there. Or you could also filter on responses to certain of these questions. And then you could actually go into the view statistics, which is up the top. So the view that I as the administrator have is going to be a lot more detailed than you as the end user are going to see. What the end user sees is a slightly more simplified sort of summary view of the responses. But you can also obviously export this data to things like PDF. The format though that you see these answers in is determined also in the question. When you set up the questions, you can say there whether it's got to be a bar graph or this or that and so on. And you'll see if I go to simple mode here, some of that was already set up when I did the questions. So, this is typically sort of some of the views you might choose to see in, say, a bar graph. Remember, this is now only 3 responses so far. Obviously, the more of you that fill this thing in, the stats are going to change, and you should see it on the end screen as well. There's examples, obviously, of pie charts, and there's a whole bunch of different ones that you can fill in. So that's something else that was in text. Here would have been nice to have had that word count, or word cloud over here, actually. And you can obviously export the images. So you can play around a lot with the statistics and the filtering, obviously, to see, what's actually happened there. Plugins, there are a couple activated. I don't think I'm using any additional plugins at the moment for this specific survey. One thing I just forgot to mention was under the survey, under the responses, we did display the responses and so on, and statistics, but there's also timing statistics over here that you can view to see how long people took to answer and so on. And you can also set limits. I'll show you now for questions how long people have got and whether it forces to move on without waiting for them. So you could also use LimeSurvey for literally completing exams or tests and so on as well. So let's just have a look at the structure, which is the actual questions. So there are the 2 groups that I mentioned before, biographical and about the videos. So it shows 4 questions on a biographical, 6 under about the videos. The G01 there indicates group 1, and that's question 2, question 3, question 9. I think that's probably the order that I've actually entered them in region. I've moved them around a bit between the groups as well. So let's have a look here, for example, the question about the continent. So what was interesting with this question is I made it a radio type list where it's mandatory, because there's nothing odd about really what continent you're on. You can choose any continent actually. But the point is you could only be on one. So this isn't a multiple choice where you've got multiple answers you can choose from. And if I go to edit, you'll see not only do you type in the actual, let me just find, where am I? Hang on a sec. That was the question type. It's a list, a radio type. But you could also, where you type in the question, you've got free text with formatting and so on as well for the text, but you can also insert an image. So I inserted an image as well, just for people that were confused about which continent they're actually on. So there's a lot of multimedia and other options you could choose. This could have been a voice clip, it could have been a video, or anything else you've inserted in here. But the point is, so there's an image with a question, you give the various options for the answers, and on the right hand side are the options you can set. It has got some pop-up help over here. A lot of this is going to take you to the manual actually. You can say whether it's a mandatory, just remember what the soft one was. Soft gives the possibility to skip without giving any answer. Okay, so you could have it mandatory, soft is skip, or it's not mandatory. I don't know what the difference between those two are, but anyway. This is where you'd set a condition, and I'll show you that other condition just now. Whether it's encrypted or not, you could store the answers as encrypted. You could also have default values if you wanted to, so you could set a specific default that people would want, and these of course you can also drag and drop over here. Clear default values. You can set any particular logic there as well. There was display settings, fixed, so you can size and group and crop and so on the actual question as to how it will appear. Keep aspect ratio. You can randomize if you want to, whether it's page breaks or not. This is also where on a per question basis, and a lot of this is often by default off. I did have to turn this on for each one, but show it in the public stats or not, and display as a chart or not, and what type of chart. So I had it set for bar chart, but these are the other chart types. The point here was that you could have some questions that are not necessarily going to show up in the stats. Maybe it's the biographical questions, maybe you just want to show people the general answers that people gave to the other groups. So this is where you'd control that. And this is where I mentioned about the timer, whether you're going to set a time limit and what happens. Does it warn and move on, warn without moving, or disable? So you can set the text and the messages as well here. You can really personalize it if you want to. So that's perfectly good actually for things like exams and so on. That was one example. This one was another mandatory one with multiple choices. So if we go look at this one, see again I set the question. That's the type of question, the group. It is a mandatory one as well. And I've asked the person out of which operating systems have you used in the last month. So in other words, it could be 2 or 3 operating systems that you have been using. And it also gives, this particular one gives with comments. So you could actually choose Linux and put a comment in the response. You'll see that. Or Android and a particular response next to it as well. And then the other one I just wanted to show though was the conditional one. So this is the question. Where the question was, where did you find out about my videos? And there were a couple of standard options you could choose from here. And you'll see the last response was something else. So the next question has got some logic which will only appear if you've chosen something else. So it's giving you it shows you the summary over here. And let me just show you how that works. It's not that difficult. The condition, as I recall, it did have a pop-up and a pick list to choose. You don't have to sit and program things or remember or I didn't have to remember any of this detail. I basically selected, picked and chose and arrived at this condition. So all I really said was here is that I checked at the previous question if the person had selected that answer number 6, which was something else. That was the condition. If that's satisfied, then this will pop up and say, but you answered something else to the previous question. So you can now expand on that here with more information. And I chose it as a long free text. So a person can type a whole lot of information here as to why they chose something else and where from and so on. And that was really about it for this question. Just want to check if that was something. You can limit also that text box if you want to size and width and number of characters. Just want to check on stats. Oh, it's not going to be a chart, sorry. But it is a bar chart. Just wanted to check if. Oh, it doesn't look like this one's results actually appear as part of the public results. Well, that's a bit sad. So yeah, that's very much it. The structure is the actual questions that you are programming with the actions and the logic and so on. And the settings are the general settings for around the survey and around the navigation and so on as well. That's really the chief areas around LimeSurvey. What we can just have a look at is, let me just go back first of all to the main page so we can see where we are. The only other thing I really want to show possibly is just the create a survey then. So you will just give it a sample title. You can choose what the main language is and whether you had those groups set up or not. I don't have any groups. And it's create survey. And you can literally start adding questions as is right there, okay? The only other thing was if you wanted to create groups. So like I said, you might want to segment or group your questions. If you're going to, then you'd add group. If you're not going to, just add your 10 or 30 or 100 questions by going there. And that code is already put in for default. This is the question. So you're going to ask the question here. And you will choose what sort of, these are all the options you've got as question types. So the one would be single choice type questions. Do you present a 5-point choice? And it'll look like that, where the person chooses either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or no answer. Bootstrap buttons, an image select list, a drop down list. Well, it's not showing that pity, but anyway, you get the idea. A radio list, or that one that I did choose with list with comments that people can fill in as well. So that's the one lot of options. Arrays are those where you see a bunch of options, but also choices. So you've probably seen these sort of things where they ask you to rate videos, for example, or Netflix surveys, or these type of things, where they've got a couple of types of questions and all of them are, 1 to 5 or 6 or whatever the choices are, with an option, say, for no answer. That is actually an array type question. So I know that people use these quite often. And you can certainly do array type questions as well. And then there's also array numbers. So these little examples help quite a bit because it gives you an idea of sort of how you'd like to ask the question. It's array texts, where you fill in text over there, you're not choosing a number. This will be a similar array, but with the options of yes, no, or uncertain. And then after arrays, the other options you've got is or types of questions is multiple choice type questions. So this means you can check all that apply. It can be one or more of the options, and you've got an option there as well by the looks of it to put text in. Image select multiple choice. This is just the plain multiple choice. Remember, although you're only seeing 3 here, it's not necessarily 3. You can expand this to 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever the case is. There's the one, the multiple choice with answers. And then you've got text type questions. Okay, not all of these are going to be question types necessarily. Some of them can detect. For example, I think this one does a browser detect. And a location. So this is just an example of, you might want to survey by areas and other things. Then you've got that sort of ability as well. I think my survey might have had an option for this, in fact. Can't remember. Then there's a huge free text. So this will be write a novel about whatever, and the person can literally write a novel in if they need to. Input on demand, I can't remember exactly what that was for. Then there's just a standard long free text, so not huge. Multiple short text, very similar to the one we saw above. And then a short free text. And then certain mask questions. So why these would be masks are because I think you'd use these as well often to filter off certain things. So certain things might be date related, for example, a particular day, and you can use logic as well on these to do conditional other questions or throw up certain responses and so on. So the equation one would be, for example, maybe body mass index, like they show here. You ask a person for their height and their weight, and then it calculates body mass index or whatever, anything similar. There could be a file upload. Again, if it's assignments or other things being done, that'll be part of it. Gender, interesting enough, they offer male, female, and no answer and no other options, but I'm not sure. We can maybe pick this just now as the question type and see if we can set that. A language switch. Multiple numeric inputs. So again, this will be particular numbers that you, free text, free numbers a person could put in. It's not an option of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, you could test against these numbers and do all sorts of things. You can remember, you can also do validation to check that the numbers are valid. That's just a plain numerical input. This will be a ranking. I think this is drag and drop type ranking. Yes, so what happens, I've got one of these examples, I think, as well in my survey. You'll take here and you'll just drag it into that box on the right. So if blue is going to be the first option, you drag blue across, then red across, and then green across if that was your option. Text display you could just use for displaying any message as well. It's really just a place marker. So instead of it being a specific question being asked, you might go to the next screen and then throw up this message or whatever, tell the students to get ready for the next question of an exam or something, and then they click when they're ready, you know, that sort of thing. So you'd use this as a pause marker and a message space. And this is just a plain yes/no type question being asked. Again, you could use it for conditional branching into other questions. Let's just have a look at this gender one. This is an example. So if I had to choose this now as the question type and say select, I just wanted to see if we've got, it looks like that is preset gender types. That's a bit sad. Remember, this is open source though, so there's nothing stopping you, of course, either using this particular question and changing the code, or just choosing one of the multiple choice questions and using that as your gender question, and then offering multiple choices for people to select from. Preferably, I suppose, one choice and not 4 or 5 choices. If you wanted to change it, you could just go back here again, and I could show you again by saying multiple choice. This one, you'll see there's only 3 there, but look what happens if you select it. You start here by typing in answer 1, and you'd add another one, answer 2, and you could go on and on here. So that is how you're going to add, if you wanted to add 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or so. That's basically where you'll do it. And if you do find if it's something that needs to be changed, you can change the order like that over there, or delete over here if you have to. And this is, of course, we've gone through this already here to show you how to make it mandatory or not, or encrypted, whatever the case is as well. And of course, just remember, not the text one, not the logic one, the stats one, you'd want to have it, if you want to have it show up in the public stats, you'll see it's defaulting to no. And that is where you'd set, if it's, you know, if it was a chart, multiple choice typically come out in a sort of a bar chart type thing, then you could choose there how it appears. So that's pretty well much really the structure and the questions and the general options per survey. What I wanted to just then lastly sort of finish off with more really is the configuration side. So as the user, you've got very basic stuff there. It is really just, you know, your name, full name, and email address. Now this you would set up, you might have, for example, 3 or 4 administrators or other people having roles. So this is where you'd add those users really. And then your own personal settings like your preferred themes and templates and various date formats, that sort of thing. I haven't got personal menus, but I imagine that would have meant you could have added customized menus. So that really is the user settings. And then really the last thing is the configuration. So you've got things like themes, labels, data integrity, and backups and updates over here. You've got some user management, and you've got some general settings. So if I go to themes, there's not very many built-in themes. I see there was about 3. I've set that to the default at the moment for the questions. You've got admin themes. You can pick, there seems to be more admin themes than user themes, and question themes. check. We've got, I just wanted to check data integrity. So this is just doing a data consistency check and telling you if there's any particular odd problems or issues here with, you know, the questions that you've set or the database or whatever the case is. That's something you might want to have a look at, you know, especially if there's problems. You can back up the database from inside the application. So it's going to dump this as a SQL file over there. That's also quite useful. So anybody could do that. You don't have to be a sort of a database administrator or anything. Now this would have been for the in-app updating as well. So I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. I don't know if you need a license for it, but I don't think so. A lot of these apps do actually update from in themselves. Let's just have a look at user roles. You can add a user role. So you could add roles here as editors or stats reporter or whatever the case is. And again, like you could obviously decide that person can't add or change questions. They can only view reports or whatever the case is. That's really where you're going to be doing that. And then let's just look at these last few settings, I think, over here. This is the dashboard that we saw at the beginning. And those are those sort of blocks you could click on to execute. You see, that's where you could also say who has got access to them. Everybody can list surveys, but only the super admin can do various of the others. These you can allocate, as I said, to those other roles if you created them, you know, if you're an organization. Display logo on, off, show survey list, that sort of thing. Let's just check global settings. You're getting a summary of some of the key stats. This is where you set site name, default theme, the administration theme, time difference. If you've got API keys, for example, to Google Maps and other things you wanted to use, you could put those in over there. You could also put your site into maintenance mode, clearing of the assets cache. So there's a couple of things you can do there. The email settings would be very much for SMTP, for example, or PHP, whatever you're going to be using to send mail to applicants. If you're making use of the emails, results, or registrations, or whatever the case is. So that's really where you're going to be setting these settings, as well as your default site admin email. Bounce settings, if you've got it set up for email. Then just some basic security settings as well. This is also where you can whitelist IP addresses. I haven't got the force HTTPS on here because I am going through a Nginx proxy manager already that's forcing HTTPS on. But you probably want that on, especially if people are filling in personal details. This is obviously for multiple, if you're creating other administrators, that'll be the template email. This is just with regard to settings for exporting of PDFs. You can export your results and your things as PDF documents. Language settings, interface settings. You can also publish APIs. It's interesting. I'm not sure what APIs connect to this. I don't have one activated though. And then, yeah, you can just recalculate the storage used by all your files and so on. So yeah, that's pretty well much really LimeSurvey. Like I said, just remember the basics are going to be very much a couple of basic questions. You choose the question type, whether it's mandatory or not, and you choose the options around those in each question. It can look fairly complicated, but it really isn't. And what I do remember when I was using it a lot, the more I used it, the more familiar I became with adding another question type and another this and another that. So if you do surveys fairly regularly, this is certainly the sort of thing for you to consider. Really, if you do surveys once off ever, maybe it's better just going with one of the free services or even using LimeSurvey's free option in the cloud. But I think if it's something you want to use a lot more, then yeah, then it's going to probably be a good option. And this is just for an example of what the results is that the public can see. You can see you can put your own logo and so on quite easily. This is no coding or anything whatsoever. So this is just the summary answers. You should all be seeing this as as various if you are responding, you'll probably see this changing. But I'm not expecting everybody to be putting fully honest answers, so it's not going to be of very much value, to be honest. But you should get this link when you've completed the survey anyway, and I will also put it at the bottom of the video. But yeah, that's really LimeSurvey in a nutshell as a self-hosted alternative to something like SurveyMonkey. Definitely, I would think worth considering if you do polls and surveys at a fairly regular time. So that's really all, and keep safe out there, and I hope to see you in my next video.